Here's what most politicians won't tell you about political violence. They're all guilty of playing favorites when it comes to condemning it. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro just dropped a bombshell at the Eradicate Hate Global Summit in Pittsburgh this Tuesday, calling out what he describes as the dangerous practice of selective condemnation when it comes to politically motivated attacks. And this speech comes at a time when the nation is still reeling from the shocking assassination of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk in Utah, just days earlier. But here's where it gets controversial. Shapiro isn't just pointing fingers at one political party. He's boldly taking aim at leaders from both sides of the aisle, including those in the highest levels of government. Shapiro, who many political insiders consider a strong candidate for the 2028 Democratic presidential race and is facing re-election next fall, has become an unexpected voice of reason in America's increasingly violent political landscape. His message? Violence is violence, period, regardless of who's behind it or which political tribe they belong to. I've been crystal clear every single time this happens, Shapiro declared during his address. This kind of violence has absolutely no place in our society, no matter what drives someone to commit it or whose hand pulls the trigger, hurls the explosive device, or brandishes the weapon. Whether it originates from the left or right, targets one political party over another, or aims at any individual, it's universally wrong and puts every single one of us in danger. The timing of Shapiro's remarks couldn't be more significant. Less than 7 days have passed since an assassin's bullet ended Charlie Kirk's life during what should have been a routine college debate at Utah Valley University. The alleged gunman, 22-year-old Tyler Robinson, was captured following an intensive manhunt that gripped the nation. But Kirk's murder represents just one piece of a much larger and more disturbing puzzle. And this is the part most people miss. The scope of political violence in America has exploded far beyond what most citizens realize. This year alone has witnessed a horrifying parade of politically motivated killings that should shake every American to their core. Former Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman, a Democratic leader, was brutally murdered in her own home alongside her husband this past June. Meanwhile, 2 Israeli embassy staff members were gunned down in broad daylight outside a Jewish museum in Washington, D.C. during May. The summit where Shapiro delivered these hard-hitting remarks carries its own tragic significance. It emerged from the ashes of the Tree of Life synagogue massacre, where a white nationalist terrorist slaughtered 11 innocent worshippers in Pittsburgh back in 2018. In moments of crisis like these, I firmly believe we bear the responsibility to speak with absolute clarity and unwavering conviction in denouncing every form of political violence, making it unmistakably clear that all of it is wrong, Shapiro emphasized. This shouldn't be a difficult thing to accomplish. Yet unfortunately, we see individuals ranging from anonymous internet trolls in the darkest corners of cyberspace all the way up to the Oval Office itself, choosing to cherry-pick which instances of political violence they're willing to condemn. But here's what should terrify every American. When people engage in that kind of selective outrage, it only drives deeper wedges between us and makes healing that much harder to achieve. There are individuals who will interpret that selective condemnation as essentially a green light to commit additional acts of violence, as long as it aligns with their particular narrative or exclusively targets the opposing side. In an exclusive interview with NBC News following his speech, Shapiro launched a scathing critique of the president's response to Kirk's assassination. And his words should make every American question what's really happening in Washington. The president claimed, following Charlie Kirk's murder, that his goal was to heal our nation, Shapiro stated, with barely concealed frustration. But you don't heal a nation by launching attacks against your fellow Americans, by labeling some of your fellow citizens as scum. Those are his words, not mine. When the president uses this tragedy as an excuse to undermine people's constitutional rights, that behavior is not just dangerous, it's fundamentally wrong and must be stopped immediately. And this is where the story takes an even more alarming turn. Following Kirk's assassination, high-ranking officials within the Trump administration have made shocking pledges of vengeance, vowing to weaponize every available governmental power to target left-wing organizations and activists they're blaming for creating the conditions that led to Kirk's death. During a Monday appearance on Kirk's own podcast, White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller painted a chilling picture, describing left-wing political organizations that are promoting violence as representing a vast domestic terror movement. Meanwhile, Vice President J.D. Vance encouraged listeners to contact the employers of individuals who were celebrating Charlie's murder. Notably, the administration has provided zero evidence supporting their claims of left-wing organizational involvement in the shooting. Here's the question that should keep every American awake at night. What happens when our government starts deciding who gets to speak and who doesn't? Political violence recognizes no boundaries whatsoever. It devastates Republicans and Democrats alike, Shapiro explained when pressed about comments from Vance and other Republican leaders. It emerges from both sides of the political spectrum, and we must maintain universal condemnation. When we cherry-pick only specific types of violence to condemn, we make everyone less safe. The controversy deepens further with Attorney General Pam Bondi's recent announcement on a Monday podcast that the Justice Department will actively target individuals who engage in hate speech, a statement that should send chills down the spine of anyone who values constitutional freedoms. Tragically, we've witnessed some individuals on the internet openly celebrating political violence or issuing calls for revenge in its aftermath, either giving violence a free pass, justifying it, or simply looking the other way, Shapiro noted in his address. This behavior only deepens existing divisions. We must categorically reject the rhetoric of vengeance and instead focus our energy on the crucial work of healing. We need to create significantly more opportunities for peaceful and respectful dialogue, while respecting each other's fundamental rights as Americans. Censorship, using the heavy hand of government to silence people, silence businesses and non-profit organizations, and restrict their right to free speech, will not solve this problem. In his NBC News interview, Shapiro made his position crystal clear. Absolutely no one should be celebrating Kirk's death. He emphasized his belief that it is extremely dangerous for the government to transform itself into the thought police or the speech police. I believe we need freedom of speech in this country to remain protected, he declared. It represents a foundational principle of this great nation. This doesn't mean we have to agree with every word spoken. Certainly, when speech is being used to directly incite violence, that crosses a clear line and becomes unacceptable. But simply sanctioning someone because you disagree with their words, that's wrong. It's fundamentally un-American. But here's what makes Shapiro's perspective so powerful. He's not speaking as an outsider looking in. He's speaking as someone who nearly became a victim himself. This past April, Shapiro's official residence became the target of a terrifying firebombing attack, when an intruder broke into the executive mansion during the early morning hours, while Shapiro and his entire family slept peacefully inside, just hours after they had gathered for a Passover Seder. The attacker used Molotov cocktails to ignite fires in 2 separate rooms within the residence. Police investigators revealed that the man charged with the attack, Cody Balmer, would have attempted to harm the governor had he discovered him inside the residence. In a bizarre twist, Balmer himself called 911 shortly after starting the fire, explaining that he was enraged by Shapiro's stance on the war in Gaza. However, his social media activity didn't clearly place him within either the left or right political spectrum. Not only was my personal safety under threat, but my wife, our children, and members of our extended family were all placed at risk, Shapiro recounted with visible emotion. I thank God every single day that we managed to evacuate safely, that no one suffered physical injuries or worse yet, lost their life. and that all the staff members who worked at the residence, along with the brave police officers, firefighters, and first responders who ran directly toward danger, remain safe. But make no mistake, just because the attack didn't result in physical harm, doesn't mean it hasn't left lasting emotional wounds. I can personally attest to this reality, especially as a father to 4 children, knowing that my life choices place them in harm's way. He continued with raw honesty. Violence in every form is completely unacceptable. Political violence poses particular dangers. It doesn't just seek to injure, maim, or kill. It deliberately seeks to intimidate, terrorize, and silence. I'm standing here today to tell you that I refuse to be deterred in my work on behalf of the good people of Pennsylvania, and I absolutely will not be silenced. Shapiro also had to navigate the aftermath of the attempted assassination of President Donald Trump last summer in Butler, Pennsylvania, when a would-be assassin struck the then-candidate in the ear during a rally and shot 2 other attendees, killing 1 person. He also addressed his state following the capture of Luigi Mangione in Altoona, Pennsylvania, the man charged with killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson in New York City this past December. At that time, Shapiro called the online praise for Mangione deeply disturbing. Unfortunately, political violence and the hatred that fuels it has become far too commonplace in our society, Shapiro stated in his address, referencing the various incidents. Different locations, different people, different perspectives. One common thread connects them all: people resorting to violence to settle political disagreements. During his NBC News interview, Shapiro spoke extensively about Mangione, emphasizing that regardless of anyone's opinions about the healthcare system, murdering an executive was completely unacceptable. Mangione is definitely not some kind of hero, by the way, he stated emphatically. The real hero in this story is the woman in Altoona, working at that McDonald's, who called the police and ensured Mangione got arrested. We cannot celebrate these individuals who are taking lives in the name of trying to make some sort of political statement or attempting to create progress. We need to reform our institutions so they function properly to solve problems like our broken healthcare system. But violence is never the answer for creating change in our communities. And here's a statistic that should alarm every American. A YouGov survey published just last week revealed that 87% of U.S. adults believe political violence represents a serious problem. But the same poll exposed a troubling trend. Significantly larger numbers of younger and more liberal respondents indicated they thought violence could sometimes be justified to achieve political goals, though 72% of U.S. adults overall maintained that violence was never justified. Some academic research has raised questions about whether public opinion polling is accurately capturing the true level of support for political violence. In his speech, Shapiro identified what he believes represents the deeper issue driving the rise in political violence. Too many Americans feel completely alienated from U.S. institutions. They feel isolated, ignored, and shut out for them, Shapiro explained. This phenomenon is particularly pronounced among younger Americans. They feel voiceless in the halls of government, unheard in our elections, in the media, in our non-profit organizations, our businesses, and within our legal system. Frustrated by a complete lack of progress and consumed by overwhelming feelings of hopelessness, they often find refuge in the dark corners of the internet, where righteous frustration gets exploited and weaponized to foment hatred. This leads to a belief among some individuals that the only way they can address their problems is through violence, he continued. They discover online communities that glorify violence and actively encourage it. What begins with cowardly keystrokes far too often ends with a trigger being pulled in our communities. This represents a genuine danger to our democracy, and we must reverse this tide. So here's the million-dollar question that every American needs to answer. Are we going to continue allowing our leaders to play political games with violence? Or are we going to demand universal condemnation, regardless of which side commits it? What do you think? Is Shapiro right that selective condemnation of political violence is making us all less safe? Or do you believe there are times when the political context of violence matters? Share your thoughts. This conversation is far from over, and your voice matters in determining where we go from here.